Um, and so, good morning. My name is Christy Kallevig, as Kelsey said, and I am an educator with University of Minnesota Extension's Center for Community Vitality. I know that many of you are very familiar with my amazing colleague and good friend, Lori Rostein. And so I'm so happy that she connected me with Kelsey so that I could be here with you today. And so today, really, we're going to think about how we can take care of ourselves as we lead in our workspaces, at our community spaces, and even those all important personal spaces that sometimes we get so busy that we rush through. But as we get started today, I really want to take a moment just to center ourselves because I don't know about you all, but I am struggling to get into this Monday. I don't know if it's the time change or it's just a Monday in general, but sometimes it's nice just to kind of focus. And so I am going to invite you first to close your eyes, and I'm going to give you a count of about 10. And I want you to acknowledge 5 things that you hear as you have your eyes closed. So close your eyes and acknowledge 5 things that you hear. All right, now open your eyes again. And this time I'd like you to look around your space and acknowledge 4 things that you can see. Next, let's take a few beats and acknowledge 3 things that you can feel. Maybe it's the edge of your desk or an uncomfortable seat in your chair if you're not in your favorite chair right now. But 3 things that you can feel. Now taking a deep breath and name 2 things that you can smell. And lastly, let's pause just one moment and recognize something that you can taste. That taste one always throws people off. But, it's that remnants for me of morning coffee, right? That just lingers. So hopefully just pausing those few moments allowed you to quiet some of the chatter that might have been in your mind as we were coming into this space today. And I'm going to invite us all to go over to to our chat function for a moment here. And let's start talking about this chatter. We all have it. It's that internal dialogue that's running through our minds as we go about our day. And, actually, we're such a small group. Let's just unmute and share your guesses with me as to how many words a minute you think we speak to ourselves.
I'm gonna
Any
go
guesses?
10.
Okay.
Anybody else?
60. Jerry, do you have a guess for me?
100?
Oh, I wish it was that low. We actually speak to ourselves the equivalent of 4,000 words per minute. I know, right? I'm seeing the faces. So whether you're a talkative person or not, our minds clearly are very chatty. And so this study that I'm reporting was completed by Ethan Cross, and he talks about it in his book Chatter, which I highly recommend. And what they found through various interesting ways of conducting research is that we speak to ourselves internally at a rate equivalent of 4,000 words per minute out loud. And so to put this in perspective, modern presidents' State of the Union speeches normally run around 6,000 words, and those last over an hour. So we are saying the same amount of words in 1.5 minutes as one State of the Union address. Crazy, right? So think of all of that internal dialogue that's happening in our minds. And our brains are really amazing multitaskers because it has found ways to use neural pathways that are able to complete all of these different tasks and allow us to maintain important functions like breathing, as well as those necessary functions like communicating with others. And so even while our brain is talking to us at this very fast rate, we're still able to function, right? We're still able to do the things that we need to do. And this is all because of working memory. Working memory is what allows us the ability to process all the different types of stimuli that are coming into our systems, as well as helping us to engage in the really important work and family conversations that we want to do or have. And when our working memory is not functioning optimally, we aren't either. And this is where our inner voice comes into play. Our brain's phonological loop is essentially the clearinghouse for everything related to words. And this includes our inner ear that helps us retain the words that we've just heard, and our inner voice is what allows us to repeat those words as if we were memorizing a phone number. And our brain relies on this loop to keep our neural pathways online so that we can maintain both those internal and external conversations. And our brains get really good at this because we've had so much time to practice this. Our phonological loop is actually developed when we're infants figuring out the world, and it grows along with us. And so as we develop our emotions and our understanding of those emotions and responses, our phonological loop is able to do that. And so the interesting thing is that as we are moving through this, as this loop is happening in our brains, it might be helping us to remember the address of our next meeting or what time we have to be there. It might be helping us to rehearse a presentation that we have planned. Maybe it's telling us how good our hair looks today. Or it could also be zooming in on that negative piece of feedback that we got from someone, maybe a disagreement that we had with a friend or a partner. It's because our inner voice, in addition to helping us remember the address, is also very skilled at immersing us in the thoughts that our brain has determined to be a threat. And so we're drawn into these negative thoughts because we naturally have a negativity bias. And this can be overwhelming during times of stress, when our fight or flight response takes over. And this is not something new, but rather something that we've inherited from our early ancestors as they worked to avoid danger and hence became our early ancestors. So the negativity bias has 5 features that kind of draw us in the fact that we get very reactive when conditions are challenging. We start to feel uneasy, dissatisfied, or disconnected. Even though everything might be fine around us, we perceive it as being really negative. And so we just are discontent with what is happening. We might overlearn from bad experiences based upon our negativity bias. We may become quickly sensitized and react to everything that's coming at us. And also, the negativity bias makes it very difficult, or it slows down our ability to come back into that normal, typical responsive mode, even when the coast is clear. And that negativity bias impacts the way that we think and feel about ourselves. And soon we might find that we have these ants walking around in our thoughts. These automatic negative thoughts occur when the chatter in our minds spiral down and we become so zoomed in on those negative experiences, and our negativity bias has us just caught in its grip that the emotions create a negative narrative. And there's 6 main types of automatic negative thoughts that most research brings to the forefront. And so these were the thoughts that were identified by Diner and Biowas Diner. And I'm going to go into each of these. And as I do, I just want you to think for a moment, how does this show up for me? So there's awfulizing, and this might be, this is typically where you exaggerate a negative event. So maybe you walk in and you had asked your teenager, as I frequently do the dishes when they come home from school so that I don't have to deal with it before I make supper. And as I walk in, I see that all the dishes are still there. And immediately I'm like, oh my gosh, she is so inconsiderate and ungrateful because she doesn't do the dishes when I ask her to. So immediately you go deep into making this event much, much worse than it really was. Distress intolerance is the perception that traps you into thinking that you won't be able to withstand or recover from a stressful event. So perhaps I'm trying to think of a good example for us today. Perhaps it is that you see a friend who has lost their partner or spouse, and you convince yourself that there's no way that you could ever handle things as well as she can. Or you've lost your job, or maybe there has been a big business change because of how COVID has impacted everything. And you think there's no way that I'm ever going to recover from all of this stress that's happening at work right now. And so that distress intolerance becomes a story that you tell yourself that you don't have the skills or the abilities to move forward like you maybe need to. There's also learned helplessness. And this is a mindset that here you believe that you have no control over a negative situation that you might be in. And so you just completely give up. This is where you say, well, it doesn't matter what I think, so I'm just not going to say anything. They don't care what I have to offer, so I'm just going to leave. So learned helplessness, where you feel like you have no control over the negative situation. Perfectionism is when you fixate on those small details and only accept excellence. So this might be where you have a project and you don't feel like you can share it with the entire team until everything is absolutely perfect. Or it can even show up in our personal lives as you don't want to invite anyone over to your house until it's perfectly clean and everything is organized and put away. With negative self-fulfilling expectancies, here your mind is creating a story from the responses of others. So even after someone has complimented you on an action, you might tell yourself that they didn't really mean it because there was an ulterior motive. Like the only reason they said that was because our boss was in the corner and they wanted the boss to hear it. So not really taking things at face value, but rather kind of creating that story that you think there are other motives at play. And then rejection goggles. So here our brain convinces us to fixate on any form of rejection, even when it may not exist. So here it might be where you walk into a meeting room and people don't say hello to you right away. So when you're caught in this ant, it is then you start to tell yourself the story, well, they don't want me here because they didn't greet me, they didn't say hello. And so that is when we see rejection goggles, that even the smallest thing leads you to creating a story in your mind that they don't want me here, I'm not included, I'm not valued. So, any questions on those 6 ants? Okay. So let's do a quick little poll, and here we can use the chat. I won't make you unmute and share, but what ant do you see yourself getting stuck in the most? And if you would be willing, maybe we can have a little conversation about how these show up for you. And I'll put the slide back up that has all the names. But what
You
ant
can
shows
also
up?
pause the recording if anybody's worried about that being something that's too personal.
Thanks,
Just let me know in chat. Oh gosh, maybe for me, I think that I have a tendency to go to the rejection goggles or the awfulizing, probably.
Yeah.
When I'm looking at those, mostly because those are the ones that I think of when I'm. These days, you don't go out very often, right? So it's all in those quick moments.
Yeah.
I would agree with the. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jerry.
That it's with COVID, it kind of became maybe a little worse with that awfulizing because you started to create, or at least I did. I'll speak for myself here. That I started to create kind of this, oh, well, if we can't get this in the stores, then this is going to happen and that is going to happen. And it just keeps going, right? So it's really trying to stay on top of that. But there is a way that we are able to work to harness these inner voices. And I will say that it isn't a check off the box kind of thing, and we're going to cure it all, and we're going to be able to sleep well at night, because I also hear you with the insomnia piece. But it is just kind of how you start to think about maybe how different strategies can help you throughout the day. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you 4 strategies that we can kind of do in the moment when these ants start to pop up, and then also a more long-term process that we can make part of our lives. Okay? And as I go through these, if you have any questions about them, please unmute or add it in the chat and we can have a discussion, okay? So as I said, our inner voice can really zoom in on things, right? It's like a button on one of those, old-fashioned cameras that we used to have, where you press the zoom button. Now you just use your fingers and get in there. But it allows us to zoom in and immerse ourselves, unfortunately, often on those negative thoughts and experiences that we view as a threat. It also allows us to zoom out in order to get a more constructive view of the situation and find ways to solve the problem at hand. And it's this act of zooming out that we refer to as psychological distance. And this doesn't eliminate our problems, but it does allow our prefrontal cortex the time to get back online and process the information that we're taking in. So I don't know if you've heard the little statistic, but it can take like up to 20 minutes for information to move from our amygdala, which is doing the fight, flight, or freeze response, up to our prefrontal cortex. And I mean, 20 minutes is a long time. We often don't have time to sit there and like read a magazine while that process is happening. But the act of psychological distancing, whether it be taking a breath or just moving spaces for a few moments, can change our perspective and give us that ability to zoom out. And so when you feel yourself becoming immersed into one of those ants, a good way to help yourself zoom out is maybe to ask yourself to view the situation from the perspective of someone other than yourself. Or ask what a fly on the wall might have heard during that meeting or conversation. And also treating yourself the same way that you would treat your friends, right? We're so good at having coffee with a friend and they tell us about a situation. It's like, well, what I'm hearing is, and you can maybe tell a very different story. And by treating yourself the same way as you would a friend, you're able to create that space as well and change that chatter so that you start to spiral back up rather than following the ant down a negative path. This also helps us to build up our psychological immune system. And by practicing this, we're able to, almost like you take your vitamins every day to ward off a cold or the flu. By adding in this practice of creating psychological distancing, you are able to really give your psychological immune system that boost it needs so that it can react more quickly when these thoughts are happening. Another strategy that you can use is to think about you. So negative chatter is increased during stressful events. And I don't know about all of you, but the last 18 plus months have presented a few of those for me. And psychologists have found that our inner voice is really starting these conversations with us as soon as the stress hormones start to appear, that are asking us what is required during the circumstance that we're in and trying to figure out if we have the resources to cope with what's required. So essentially, our inner voice is leading us down a path of trying to determine if what we are experiencing is a threat or a challenge. And as this conversation is happening, we are able to harness that inner voice immediately and invoke the power of you. Researchers have found that by simply changing the chatter from "I get so nervous in a job interview," for example, to "everyone gets nervous in a job interview, you can do this," people were able to have a more positive view of themselves and the situation that they were in. You can also do this by using your name or the pronoun that you use, because it allows your brain to normalize the reactions that you're feeling and gain control over the thought cycle. So rather than, there's no way I'm going to get this report done by next Tuesday, stopping and saying, I know everyone on the team is really stressed about getting this project completed by Tuesday, but I can do it. You can do it. You've got this. Okay? And changing that self-talk for yourself to help you spiral up in those moments. When we're dealing with threats, fears, and overwhelming emotions, we have always been told that it's good to talk to others, to not keep our feelings inside. And that is still true. But we need to make sure that we have a balanced group of advisors that can help us during these stressful situations. Whether it is on social media, on the phone, or in text, or even those face to face situations, it's actually a natural human tendency to meet emotional need with an emotional response. And so if we're sitting down or talking with a friend and we're very upset and negative, it's a natural tendency of that friend to meet us where we're at with the same level of intensity and emotion. And so this does not help the negative chatter because it can lead to co-rumination. So now instead of just me having the negative chatter in my head, my friend is also getting negative chatter in their head. And so instead, it's important that we make sure that we have those great friends that will really sit down with us and fill that emotional need. But we also need to make sure that we have an equally valued group of people who will help us explore the cognitive side of this experience. So helping us to move into more of that rationalizing space. And I like to call these our board members, our valued board members who can help us to meet kind of those more strategic or big picture views. And so these are the folks that will help you to not get immersed in the negative chatter, but bring you up and really help you to see how another person is viewing the situation in a cognitive way, but not necessarily meeting you at that same exact emotional intensity. Now, I was very fortunate to have both of my grandmothers until 2020, and they were great at giving me advice. My one grandma, her answer for any problem was to go outside. Had a headache, go outside. Had a bad test at school, go outside. Broke up with your boyfriend, get outside. And really, Grandma might have just been trying to get us out from under her feet. There were 17 of us, and so she was, often looking for a little quiet time in her quilting room. But she might have also just been very insightful on a key piece of psychological research that has been gaining support since the early 2000s. So more and more studies are coming out that are supporting the idea that green space impacts our psychological outlook as well as our physical health more than we've ever given it credit for. Additional research is showing us the connections between reducing chatter and our exposure to green space. So by getting yourself outside for even just 5 minutes, you are able to change the chatter. You're able to change your inner voice. Now, the really interesting thing is that as we're going into Minnesota winters, where it's not always easy to get that outside time without bundling up, you can also achieve the same aspect by having a picture that features the environment or the outdoors in your office or in your living space. Simply by taking a look at that picture, or even having one of those recordings that has like nature, maybe it has piano music or jazz music over the top, but it has those nature sounds behind it. That also can help us connect to the outdoors and have a significant impact on our inner voice. And they believe that this is related to the fact that nature provides us with a sense of awe. And this then contributes to us having the ability to gain that psychological distance that we talked about earlier, and to change those thought patterns really without any direct effort on our part. Now, my other grandma, she had a little different answer to those same ailments that I might come to her with. Her answer to the headache, bad test, or disastrous breakup was that I needed to clean my room or help clean the kitchen, but just I needed to tidy up something. And there's truth in this as well. The mere act of tidying up our work or living area allows us to feel that we have more control over our life. And this then translates to having more control over the chatter in our minds. So this can boost our mood and allow us to spiral our chatter upward into a more positive direction. There's also the idea of the positivity offset. And this is that we really have more positive interactions and instances within our daily lives, even though it might not feel like it. because of that negativity bias again, we might focus in more on those negative pieces of our day. However, if we aim to have a positivity ratio of at least 3-to-1, we can really boost our mood and we can control the chatter in our minds better. And so by doing this, we want to embrace the research of Barbara Fredrickson, who identified that we need 3 positive interactions, 3 really heartfelt, positive emotional experiences that can uplift us to every 1 negative. And so by doing this, it is one of those things where when you are in that negative space or you're starting to hear that negative chatter, taking a deep breath and thinking about, okay, let's name 3 good things that have happened today. Or in the last hour, what 3 good things can I force myself to look at? And it might be something as simple as, I really like the pen that I'm writing with right now. But as long as it's positive, it can help us to start to shift the tide of those negative thoughts. So the long-term strategy that I mentioned comes down to the 3 R's. And this is connected to journaling. Journaling is a great thing to do, and it doesn't have to be that you sit down and write long pages every night before you go to bed. It can be notes that you put in your calendar. It can be post-it notes that you have on your desk. But journaling can allow us to gain a form of psychological distancing and help us on focusing on changing those ants as we think about how we record, rationalize, and replace them. So I'm going to invite everybody to do this right now, but think about an ant that has maybe been popping up. Maybe it was something that was nagging at you over the weekend and you just want to squash that ant today before we get into another week. But think about that for a moment, and I want you to first record the ant. I want you to record every detail that you can think of that experience. The feelings that you had, your reactions, any lasting impacts that you might have felt throughout the day, or as I said, even the weekend. So take just a moment and write down what you can think of that ant that is just walking around in your brain today. So the reason that we want to pause and really write down all of those aspects, the feelings, our reactions, those lasting impacts, is so that we are able to identify each key aspect. Because if we can't catch the ant, we can't examine it and get to the root. So by pausing to write down all of those details, it allows us to move into the next step, which is rationalize. And here we're going to identify what ant we're truly dealing with by giving it a name and identifying the role that our inner voice has played in the situation. So maybe it's awfulizing and our inner voice has just contributed to making this really big mountain out of a very small molehill. But take a moment and think about what ant you're truly dealing with and give it a name. And also think about how your inner voice has contributed to this situation. The key aspect of this step, when we pause to rationalize and give a name to it, is that it allows us to move into replace, where we are then able to challenge the thought and replace it with a more accurate view. So now take a moment and reflect back on the things that you wrote as you recorded the different aspects of this ant, how you've rationalized it, given it that name, and how your inner voice played to it. And now replace it with a more accurate view. Sometimes as we're trying to replace it, it can be helpful to ask ourselves, what would my friend say if they, or excuse me, what would I say to a friend if they came to me with these exact same thoughts? So go ahead and take a moment and try and replace that ant. So by practicing the 3 R's, we'll eventually be able to have more control over our inner voice and catch ourselves before we start walking into those ants or chasing one around. And you're able to move your chatter into a more positive direction. But I'm curious to learn from you all today. We'll just add it to the chat, or you can certainly unmute, but what strategy do you like to use when you get stuck with an ant? Do you have any strategies that work?
Oh, this is Jerry.
Go ahead, Jerry.
I like to go outside, and I do exactly what your grandmother told you. And somebody else takes control of my body and gets me dressed and gets out that door, and I take the dogs for a walk, and that just seems to clear my head and things seem better.
Yeah.
I'm going to try that at night when I wake up now. Instead of laying there with thoughts in my head, I'm going to step outside and look at the sky instead of doing it outside.
Yeah, be safe while you step outside and look at those stars. But I think that's a great thing to do. I say be safe because we had a skunk show up on our step the other day. So, you got to be careful at night now.
Well, they could be skunks. Another thing I do is laundry because it's just a mundane household chore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Doing anything you can to kind of create that distance. That's great. Great.
I use journaling. I write if I can't sleep or something's going through my head at night, and I try to write everything down just to get it off my brain, and then I can usually go back to sleep.
Awesome. There is power in journaling.
I try to use the kindness that I would use in other people on myself. Like try to give myself kind of the internal lecture of like, this is what I would say to somebody else. Harder sometimes to accept your own kindness, though.
It really is. It really is. I am trying to get better at journaling. I'm a periodic journaler, but I always feel better when I do it. So definitely trying to make more of that. And Jerry, I still continue on those really bad days. It's let's just get outside. Let's just do something outside and we will feel better. So let's kind of as we close out today, I wanted to share a few resources with you. So I mentioned the book Chatter by Ethan Kross. He has some really great stuff in this book, so I definitely recommend that. If you don't have time to read another book, I get that because I have far too many on my nightstand as well. But he also had a good podcast as well. So I would recommend that podcast from the Good Life Project, and then also how to increase your positivity ratio. And I'll make sure that Kelsey has the link to that article as well, and the podcast, so that she can send that out in a follow-up email. And so with that, I just want to thank you all again. See if there are any questions that you might have for me. I can also provide Kelsey with my contact information, and you're welcome to send me an email or give me a call if you want to talk about anything further. But I'd love to hear any questions or thoughts that you have after hearing some of this information about our inner voice.
I'm going to try journaling at night. Oh, sorry.
Good
That
luck
was
with
an
that,
excellent
Jerry.
idea. Karen has, and I'm going to start writing down those thoughts because sometimes I can't remember in the morning. Thanks.
Perfect.
Well, Christy, I'm just so glad you could come talk with us today. We got the gift of a little extra time too. 5 minutes in our day. Those can be used in multiple ways, right? Maybe some self-care for all of us today.
Yeah.
So I want to just thank you for your time. If anybody wants to hang out a little bit longer and chat, you're welcome to do so. Otherwise, enjoy the day. It is so lovely out today. Today is like a gift in itself. So if you are feeling like you have to have some mind chatter or inner voice, this is a great day to use it for the positive, and go take your body outside and enjoy a couple minutes of good self-talk.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you all so much. It was great to see you.